What if we could learn from outstanding leaders in business, sports, and education from some of the best voices in corporate America? Lighting the Path is a series of interviews with industry leaders whose stories highlight strategies that build purpose-driven cultures, engage and retain top talent, develop drivers that create high-performance teams, and connect people to the vision of your company. Join us to hear from game-changing, talented leaders whose paths make a difference at work and at home.
I enjoy getting the opportunity to meet people literally around the United States and our YouTube and podcast series, talking to leaders about leadership. But not often do I get a chance to work right alongside them or kind of see their brain actually in action in the field of battle, so to speak. Well, today's guest I actually met because projects I've been blessed to work with the American Staffing Association, which is arguably one of the largest staffing trade associations literally in the world. And I've had a chance to work with Dustin Norwood in developing out content and programs and seeing his amazing talent and being able to create learning opportunities that are more than learning, but they're really helping leaders develop their employees. And that's our topic today. It's about employee development. And the reason why is that research has shown that employee development is the number one retention and, more importantly, the number one engagement tool that a leader has at their disposal in today's marketplace. And so I want to welcome, our guest today, Dustin Norwood.
Thanks, Mike. I'm glad to be here. You already set me up for some big success, I hope, in giving you some profound ideas and ability to kind of look in there and look at what firms and different businesses are doing in terms of their employee development, because I think you already hit the nail on the head there. It is all around this question of engagement now, right? I mean, that's how we're retaining people. That's how we're developing. That's how we're getting production out. It all kind of links back to what that employee feels and what they're able to see in themselves and produce within, look at the things that they're putting out there in terms of what they're able to do, what they're not able to do, what they want to do, where they see their career, what gets them energized on the job versus what doesn't. I mean, all these questions factor in to this larger question of employee development. And so I'm completely stoked to be here today to talk to you about this topic, because I've lived this topic for
Sure. Yeah,
I don't know, so many years now. I won't get into ages, but I've lived this topic for a while.
Yeah, we can now measure in decades, can't we? So
yes.
But that's the reason, Dustin, I wanted to visit with you, because you have a unique perspective because of your role as the Vice President and Chief Learning Officer for the American Staffing Association. Your so-called clientele, the people that are part of your coalition, are executive search firms, staffing firms, recruiting firms. They're business owners and leaders in that space particular. And so you get a chance to see a lot of organizations and the principles that drive that industry are the same principles that drive other industries from a leadership standpoint. So you have a unique window to see what people are doing and really excelling with, but at the same time also where the holes are. And that's what I want us to be able to visit on. When you look at the work that you do, because you've also, from a background standpoint, I was fascinated when I learned about how you got into the development field. You actually came out of some rather interesting organizations earlier in your career. Tell us about it.
Oh, geez. I'll give you the short version. No, I did not set off for a career in HR or employee development, organizational development. I was a musician. I was going to compose and become a professor. I wanted to teach. I love teaching. And so, I took a little year off and I decided to head over to Japan to do some teaching over there, just to explore what it was like before I went back to grad school, to, take that journey to become Dr. Norwood, which I'm not. Took a few detours. And so in Japan, I really picked up this love for the students and the adult learners. I'd worked with children before. I'd been a music teacher. But when I saw their needs and their different aspirations, what they were trying to achieve, that's what really called me into the field. I still recall one of my first clients there at the school year. And what he wanted to achieve was his promotion, for example. And what his company required was them to pass a certain level of equivalence with a kind of a question about cultures and language. And so, I worked with him one-on-one, and, I'll never forget the day he came in and he's like, I got it. He's like, they're shipping me off. I forget what country he was going to, but anyway, that was his career aspiration, and I helped him achieve that. And you could see the light in his eyes and how engaged he was. So that's how the bug bit me. And then from there, I went into educational consulting from a publishing company. There was an educational publishing company over in Japan, and then came back during the Great Recession, because that's what people do, because I just completed my grad degree in HR. And then that's really when I got the luck of getting my first federal offer to join that workforce, and worked with the National Labor Relations Board as one of their senior employee development specialists. And then finally got the call to move over to the Patent and Trademark Office, where I served as their Deputy Chief Learning Officer. And that was a different world, I'll tell you what. There were about 10 to 11,000 employees.
I was going to ask how large, because I want to make sure people heard what you said. This is the U.S. Patent and Labor Office, right?
Oh yeah, it's a massive apparatus with engineers, patent attorneys, support staff also belong that. It's certainly one of the largest branches of the Commerce, Department of Commerce. And actually, it's really interesting, not to go too deep on that one. Patent and Trademark is one of those rare government agencies that operates like a business, because most of the funding for the Patent and Trademark Office comes through patent fees. And so it's a production shop. People don't often know that about that. So that's some, not to go into some other tangents, but that's where I really got in deep with leadership development. And I kind of headed over a team of leadership development, executive development there. And the interesting, and I think this will go towards the staffing industry, we had to account for every minute of training and demonstrate the ROI of that, because every minute away from patent examiners producing was money, and they calculate it in dollars. So, every training class, every hour I spent with a leader better get a return on it, or we're not going to run that program any longer.
That's interesting. You don't normally think of that as a governmental mindset, right? Behavior. And so that I can see how that fit over into the staffing world, because every minute off the desk, every minute that's not in front of a client, every minute that's not in front of a candidate is considered to be lost opportunity.
Exactly. So when I came over here, and that's where I came, I too was recruited into the American Staffing Association. It's been a little over 4 years now. And that was one of the first things I noticed. I was like, oh, you have that mentality that if I spend 1 minute away from the phone, 1 minute away from this, 1 minute away, then that's lost opportunity to interact with a client, with a candidate, to talk those sort of things. So it's like, these people care about their time, and they don't want to have their time wasted. But that being said, that's always the struggle we have, is saying that's easy enough said and done when we're talking about technical skills that have a one-to-one connection. You can see the output. If I teach you how to do X, and then you're able to achieve Y, easy enough. Something technical like computer skills, easy output, right?
Mm-hmm.
Leadership, a little bit fuzzier, right? Because you don't necessarily see the payoffs for that until down the line, or with certain behaviors, you have to look at retention numbers. There are many different quantifiable ways you could look at it, but it's a little bit squishier than, say, those harder skills. So, that's the challenge across all industries I've worked in, that I've heard across the board, is like, yeah, we want to spend more time with this development. We just, we don't have the time for it, or we don't prioritize it. That's pretty much what I'm hearing them say when they say that.
Very much so. Yeah, very much so.
I'm just going to put it bluntly out there. That's what I hear. It's like, it's not a priority. I'm like, okay, I understand that. So it's hard to make a business case, but it's out there, for the firms that do it. And certainly for those that see the impact of leadership. And going back to what you said, engagement, that's where the real measurement's at.
And if we want to broaden the audience down on this subject, Dustin, because what we found is that I've always been amazed over for me, the decades I've been involved with working, teaching and training within the recruiting industry, is that it seems like when the market is just booming, things are just exploding, right? This is like 2021, 2022. that I don't have time to take people away from sales or recruiting or the operational part of the business, right? And then, because we got to feed the line. But what was ironic is in 2020, whenever COVID hit and the marketplace went and shuttered and businesses fell off the table, I was amazed at how people sometimes made the decision, well, I can't afford to take my people off the desk because they got to go make sales because things are going bad.
Yeah, and it's dangerous, and I don't want to sound alarmist, but I know what's coming, right? Most of the things I used to do on my job are now defunct. We no longer even think about those things. And frankly, I was just talking, upcoming for Staffing World very soon is Peter Diamandis. So we were talking to him yesterday, and his concern was like talking about how it's not so much a person's ability to do those jobs or those technical jobs anymore. It's their ability to quickly repurpose and do new things, because we're going to be living in a world very soon with AI where the thing you did yesterday is no longer useful because the AI has done that. And it's only going to speed up. It's not slowing down. So really what we know is your technical skills are still extremely important, but it's really those things that AI can't do, those things that you can't, learn. Like I was going to bring this up, today anyway, but your empathy skills, for example, we know that's something that leaders, everybody can work on right now. And it is a developable skill, that is going to be, you're going to be able to leverage that. And you're going to be able to do it better than an AI can do it. And that's where the real value add is, right? So you got to identify those areas. Now, frankly, those are the ones that have been deprioritized in the past. So it's a little bit of an uphill battle, trying to fight the battle, saying you need to start investing in these skills right now. Or, I'm hesitant to say 5 because it might even be sooner. But
when they talk about AI, the fact that at Execuvision, when you and I spent some time talking, I'd love to credit the gentleman who spoke about this, and unfortunately I can't get there. I take it back. It may not have been. It may have been another conference that I went to, the National Speakers Association. At any rate, the statistic that was shared was that they did an IQ test on ChatGPT beginning of last year. And the IQ of ChatGPT, not the amount of information, but the ability to process, to think, was 69, right, on an IQ. And average is 100, 90 to 100, average IQ. They said this year, they retested it this year, first quarter of this year, it was 169.
Yes, it was.
Which was equal to Einstein. And the projection was end of 2025, it will be 600.
It will be.
Which, when you think about this, it's the ability to process. But what's fascinating, and is that whenever the job boards came in, that was supposed to put the staffing industry out of business. They won't need us anymore, right? And it turned out to be one of the greatest tools we're ever given. Yeah, and then our big buddy LinkedIn came in. Now that was going to put us out of business because they wouldn't need us anymore, right? And that became the greatest tool that we ever had. Well, guess what? The AI is supposed to make recruiters obsolete because companies could do a lot of their stuff themselves.
Yeah.
That is literally becoming the most phenomenal tool and resource that we have to make us more functional. But what happens is we need to bring in the emotional intelligence, what you're talking about, the empathy factor, because that's the part that we add value to the business of recruiting and staffing. That's the part we add value to leadership, isn't it?
It is. And, I've seen a lot of trends in leadership, obviously, since the beginning to come over. And I can tell you the shift has been that. I think when I first came in, a long time ago, we were still in that transactional kind of leadership track of like, you do work for me, I lead you, I'm your boss, do this, do that. And it was, a transactional process. To moving over towards the situational leadership model, where it's like, okay, different strokes for different folks. We have to manage people differently. We have to understand them a little bit better. We do have to practice some degree of empathy, but still that's very transactional sort of relationship. I am behaving this way, or I'm managing you this way because you want that, and I need production out of you, right? And now, the biggest trend that we've seen over the last few years is the servant leadership model, right? And servant leadership is all about the emotional intelligence and the empathy of it, of figuring out, I always equate it as like, it used to be that leadership was something that was done to you, right? It was actively, I'm going to lead you, I'm going to pull you. Now, I think the model is more leadership is something that's done for you. And that, that means leaders getting in there and saying, what does my person need? Where are they at right now? The pandemic showed this certainly. The leaders who excelled at this retained so many staff and were able to get through this fairly unscathed by just saying, hey, where are you at right now, employees? I know for us, I'm going to, toot our own horn for a second. It was looking at the working moms and saying, what are you dealing with at home? The working dads, what are you dealing with at home? What's going on there? How can we accommodate these things with still getting the work done? And it works. It just works to understand and listen to your people and asking the questions of just saying, what are the obstacles in your way of producing, and how can I eliminate those obstacles for you? It's a lot. And here's the secret of it. It's a lot easier to do than the old style of leadership where you had to manage everything. You had to be the person who knew everything and did everything, right? You don't need that anymore. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You just have to be the person who understands the most people and how to get the best out of those people, right? And that's a skill. It's developed, but
I think that's an important thing that you said, Dustin, is that what we're talking about here is not just a gift that we're born with, which is our personality, right? It's a muscle that can be developed and expanded. As a matter of fact, you and I did some work together recently, you and your team, on the ASA's micro-credentialing course.
Correct, yeah.
And you'd given me the challenge of crafting something specifically on leadership, specifically on engagement.
Right.
And that mindset. And a lot of what we came up with when you and I were brainstorming on had to do with looking at how do you engage your team more. And I want to make sure that we chronicle what you just said, which was the role of leader is not to do, it's to drive results by removing obstacles.
Right. Absolutely. And I agree. The ProStracks were a good example. And, that's an obstacle. We go back to the thing, we're talking about employee development, developing your employees. An obstacle to them is they have X production to meet, and they don't have an infinite amount of time, right? They want development, and you could easily say, well, we're just not going to do any training because nobody has time to do any training, and I know production is more important. Or you could say, hey, here's some micro learning opportunity. Here's a article to read that I saw. Let's take 30 minutes later this month to discuss this article. Things like that. People think you need a very formalized way of doing these things, and really, we've been doing them for thousands of years the way we've always learned from each other. Peer learning is even more. I'm going to brag on like Gen Z and Gen Alpha for a minute because, I'm going to nerd out for a moment. Hopefully your viewers don't mind this, but one of my big areas of research and a deep love of mine is studying learning theory. And the learning theory that's been in operation, the primary learning theory that's been in operation to the present, probably a few years ago, has been this idea that's called cognitivism. And that's the idea that in order to really learn, you have to make use of whatever the theory is and put it in your own sort of context. You gotta apply it in context. That makes sense, right? I mean, that's kind of on the job training when you think about it. I learned something from somebody taught me, and I'm applying it, and I'm getting a result. That's still, we're still in that kind of cognitive based world, and certainly we're always going to be that way. But now we see the trend moving towards something called connectivism. And I think there was a Google article almost a decade ago that kind of hit on this, but the idea behind connectivism is it no longer matters what you know so much, is who you know, and do you know how to access that thing? Because we live in a network now. I mean, social networks, online, YouTube, anything you want to know can be found at this. We're talking AI, right? I use AI at times. Like, AI, make me smarter on this subject. And it schools me. 9 times out of 10, I'm wrong. And I do verify. I trust but verify when I go into the AI. But maybe it's not important that I know so much technical information any longer. So what does that leave me, as a leader? And that really is, again, I going back to those, it is my ability to connect with others, my ability to manage others, to get the best from them. You talked about engagement. That's another area I won't really, wade deep into. And depending on what models you choose, there's different aspects of it, but a lot of them are pretty standardized in their headings. And the one I always go back to, and it's one of my favorite books read back in high school, but I always refer back to, is good old Joe Frankel and A Man's Search for Meaning, right?
Yes. Yeah. Powerful.
So powerful. Please read it if you're a leader. If you have not read this book, you need to go. It's a day read. It's very thin. Very
Give
harrowing.
some context for somebody listening to this, may not be familiar with him. Let them tell them who he is and what the power of that book.
Yeah. So Joe Frankel was a Jewish psychiatrist and a theorist who lived, unfortunately, during Nazi Germany and was in a concentration camp. And he chronicled his observations of the psyche of the prisoners as he suffered through the concentration camp. This is his memoir of being in a concentration camp. Yet he talks about it through a lens of meaning, finding meaning, hanging on to meaning, of being that only thing that keeps people in the fight to live. He talks about men who lost that meaning and just ceased to live, just basically buckled under the pressure. Now, it's a sad, depressing read. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but what comes out of it is this idea that everyone needs to have a driving purpose. And since we spend so much time at work, if we are working without purpose, then people are not going to be engaged. They're not going to be fulfilled. And frankly, they're just going to phone it in, because there's just no energy to do those things. There's no meaning to it. So, that's one of those most powerful engagement things that we look at, is the meaningfulness of the jobs you're doing. And that's where, again, a leader kind of steps in and talks to their people and says, are you getting this meaning out of your job? What are you getting out of this? And if they're not getting anything out of it, that's your job to kind of create meaning for them, help them find that through whatever it might be.
Thanks for joining us today on Lighting the Path, Strategies for Tomorrow's Leaders. If anything in this podcast speaks to you, if I've challenged you, or if you want to spend time digging into this subject a little deeper, or if you disagree with me, reach out. My contact information is on our website, lightingthepath.net, or email me at mike@mikelejeune.com. Also, look for me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect our networks. Keep lighting the path for those who choose to follow you. It's more than a responsibility. It's an honor.